Howard was a senior in my team, and one day during chit-chat, he asked me to recommend some cologne to him. As I know a lot about perfumes and fragrances, I recommended some, and then he asked me to help him buy it. I suggested that it's better to try cologne in person before buying, but he insisted multiple times that I buy my recommendation for him. And so, eventually I did. After purchasing it, I WhatsApped him the receipt, and he texted back, "Thanks. I'll treat it as a gift from you." He did pay me back later, so I assumed he was joking. The manager of my previous team, Alfred, asked me to grab a drink after work one day, as he noticed that I had been frustrated at work. Lately, he also said that I can invite more people if I wanted to, and so I invited Kate, my closest friend in the company, who was also on Alfred's team. Kate suggested that I invite one more colleague, as she believed that it was better to hang out in a group of. Before I thought for a bit and invited Howard, as he had worked under Alfred before, and I told Howard that Alfred wanted to buy all of us drinks. I regularly have drinks with Kate and another colleague, Aiden, after work. So, this was the first time that I hung out with either Alfred or Howard. After the drinks, we decided to take the last scheduled subway home. Only Howard and I lived in the same direction, and from the previous chit-chat, I knew that he lived near Stop A, which was 10 stops before mine. I lived quite far from the subway, a 1-hour walking distance, so I planned to take a taxi. After getting off at my stop after we got on the subway, Howard started saying things that made me feel uncomfortable. For instance, he asked when he could become as close to me as Aiden, or whether Aiden had ever been to my apartment. To be honest, I wasn't even that close with Aiden. We were more like work friends, and I was annoyed by all those weird questions. But I thought to myself, it's just a few more stops until Stop A, and I'll have my peace soon. Howard didn't get off at Stop A, though I asked him about it too, which he replied that he had some errands to run near Stop B the next morning, so he'd be staying at a friend's place near Stop B, and Stop B was just one stop before mine. Luckily, Howard shut up soon, probably because of my lack of response, so I just looked at my phone in silence, and I only noticed that he was still there. When I was about to get off at my stop, he followed me off the subway and ordered to take a taxi together. He said that he dropped me off at my place and then go to his friends, which made no sense, since those two drop-off points were in completely opposite directions from my subway stop, so I declined by saying that I planned to walk home. He didn't know where I lived, and then he offered to walk me home. I told him it was an hour away and persuaded him to just get a taxi outside the subway stop, and he finally budged and called a taxi through the app, which showed the estimated fare. I overheard him murmuring the amount, and it was definitely more than the fare from the subway stop to Stop B, more like the fare, the Stop A, and I suspected the staying at a friend's place excuse had been a lie all along, just to follow me home a week later. Kate told me that she overheard Howard insinuating to Alfred that they were in a relationship. We worked in a profession where relationships between staff had to be reported, and spouses couldn't work in the same team. And I was creeped out by Howard, but didn't bring it up to Alfred, since he didn't ask me about it either. And a month later, Alfred invited his team and several other colleagues that he had previously worked with to dinner to celebrate the end of a project. After the meal, Alfred asked me where I was heading, as he knew that I had 2 apartments. Kate and Howard were walking with us. I told Alfred that I was going back to the apartment in the same direction as Kate's, which was in the opposite direction of Howard's. And Howard then joined the conversation and said that he was going that way too, because a friend was hosting a party there. And Kate and I were very skeptical. On the subway, Kate asked him where the party was, and Howard replied, "Stop C," which happened to be my stop. So Kate and I pretended that we had other plans, and that I wasn't getting off at stop C, and Howard eventually got off at stop C, and I rode with Kate to her stop before getting on another subway. Back to my stop, I avoided him as much as possible until I eventually quit that job. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college, and also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led to me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and placed me in a group that was supposed to teach interview skills. In order to fix that, the group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group, or just needed an extra member, and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers. But that's not really relevant to the story. And the other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me, and obviously didn't share any of my interests. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of the one member I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic, like John, so that's what I'll call him. JN immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their instruction to the course to complain that him being there was useless, since he would be retiring in a few years anyway, and no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction that he wanted, I assumed the rest of the group just thought that he was a weirdo or attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course, and he waited until we had been given the paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but she was a lying jerk and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial, or any evidence or bruises or other injuries before that either. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and sent him to jail. Those are his words. And this immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true crime channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never even happened or didn't leave visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. And I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him, regardless of which one it was, and would avoid interacting with him as much as possible, outside of just polite hell and passing him things if he asked. And like I said before, I didn't really interact much with the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, spent the dinner break in the library, while the men all snuck off to the pub and then went home immediately. After the second half was over, no one ever asked me how I spent my breaks. And since the pub and library were in opposite directions and couldn't be seen from the front of the building where the group met due to the way the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I'd been, and that made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, On one particular day, I bumped into a friend during my dinner break and decided to put off visiting the library until after the course was over so I could catch up with them instead. When I finally got around to it, I spent at least a quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books. I ended up being drawn into a conversation with the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, one that was getting a new movie the full following year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with chatting with a friendly man around my age who shared my interests after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We've been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, looking confused and concerned. He had just opened his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by the shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touch without warning and would never have done that to me. So I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger. I knocked their hands away. While turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk, it was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face. And as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing that he would find me there and how I practically lived in the library before chattering away. As if we were close friends, I was very confused. It was obvious that he had just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but JN had kept behind while the group was leaving because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly. And as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of knowing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left shortly after me and simply seen me go inside while walking in the same direction, he would have come in by then. The only way it made sense for him to know, to look for me there, and joke that I practically lived there was if he somehow learned that I was going to the library during my dinner breaks, knew that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I wouldn't go after the meeting instead. What made this even stranger was the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions, and mostly ignored me, the same way that I ignored him, unless we were forced to interact for some reason. So why he was now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close was very odd. While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in and asked if I knew him. He had obviously noticed my negative reaction to being touched, and when I briefly explained the situation, the librarian politely asked John to leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to insist that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't, and how ridiculous it would be to claim that an 18-year-old girl and a 50-some or 60-some old man were friends in the first place, when the librarian asked again, outright stating that harassing other customers was not acceptable, and that John would be removed if he refused to leave alone. John smiled and agreed to leave, but in the tone that you would use to humor a child. And then, after walking out, he very obviously stationed himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave. As well, the librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on. I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to figure out that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure Johan left me alone. But his break was several hours away, If I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening. And since I couldn't stay, he asked me to at least come in the next time that I was there to let him know that I was safe. And he reluctantly would watch me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was, and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we weren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on mine, he corrected me and stated that we both needed the numerous such and such bus, and telling me where he lived, which in fact was on the same bus route as me. And although I was tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, or even sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the way home, it was clear that he was going to follow me. He still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away, and there were several dark alleys along the way that I had no intention of going near. While in his company, when I had agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he finally let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were still good friends again. When we reached the stop, John kept walking, which seemed odd, but I hoped that my lack of response had finally made him give up and leave me alone. Or maybe he had confused that stop with another further along, and I could run while his back was turned. But no such luck. As soon as he had realized that I wasn't following, he came back, frowning as if he were confused, and asked, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I bluntly told him no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him. When that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned wanting coffee while leaving the classroom. That was an obvious lie, since I don't drink coffee, and I told him so. John's only response was to say I didn't have to get coffee and keep pushing me to go to a cafe with him when I firmly refused. He apparently took that his not wanting to drink in public because then he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we got there, I wasn't to worry because that was his 18-year-old daughter. Because, of course, an 18-year-old would just definitely be lounging around naked on her father's furniture in front of him. Right, other people at the stop were staring at us now, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18, and I firmly told John that I didn't want to go to his flat and to leave me alone, and he completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and saying that I was at least 29, when most people at the time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. At that moment, the bus arrived, and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe if necessary. The driver would just throw him off. But no, I sat in an aisle seat to block John from sitting next to me, but he physically shoved me across the seat, pinning me against the window so tightly I could barely move. He pressed his knees against the seat in front to make sure that I had no way to get past him unless he allowed it, and the ride felt endless. He kept touching me, trying to convince me to go to his flat, and although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men, they would quickly look away or become very interested in their phones. As soon as I got home, I emailed the instructor, explained everything, and asking to switch groups. She ignored it for an entire week until I followed up, threatening to involve the police, and their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead essentially kicking me out. If I were the problem, I saw John a few times after that, but fortunately, he never noticed me or approached me again, and I hope it stays that way. I was a freshman in high school. I'm currently a senior. My freshman year, I moved schools and started hanging out with a new friend group. Two friends from that group already lived in my neighborhood, so we usually all just hang out at my house. Whenever we decided to go to my other friend's house, we'd usually just walk since it was close. Those friends were just renting their house at the time, so eventually they sold it and bought a house in the same neighborhood. When they moved in, we started hanging out there a lot, since they had a huge garage in their backyard where we could chill without being bothered too much. And we eventually got tired of walking all the way over there, since it was on the complete opposite side of the neighborhood. And since we couldn't drive, we started taking a shortcut. There was a path through someone's lawn on my side of the neighborhood, so we started cutting through their yard. During the day, my friend said that at one point they talked to the owners while they were outside, and they said they didn't mind us walking through their yard as long as we didn't wake them up. They even turned off their motion sensor lights so we could cut through at night without causing commotion, and all was well for a couple of weeks, and until we noticed that the man in the house across the street would always be outside with a cigarette, taking pictures of us when we walked up the road. And this went on for a good year or two. We told my parents, but just tried to ignore it altogether, since it creeped us out. And the creepiest part was that no matter what time we went through, he was always out there watching and snapping pictures of us. It didn't matter if it was 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. He was always lurking in the shadows of his porch with that cigarette ready to snap a picture. Now fast forward to my junior year. My friend was house sitting for his parents while we were on vacation. We were all staying over there and decided to run over to my house for food. And on the way over, I spotted the cigarette and pointed it out to my friend. Mind you, it was 2:30 a.m. and we could feel this dude staring at us. We started to crap bricks and walked faster and faster until we got off that road. When we got back to my house, we both felt really uneasy, so we grabbed a couple of knives and a can of mace before heading back with snacks. I also decided to grab flashlights since it was especially dark that night. And as soon as we got close to the house again, I got that same eerie feeling. I saw what looked like a person crouch behind a bush in the front yard. I lit the bush up with my flashlight and immediately saw a shadow darting back behind a tree. We started walking fast after and kept looking back every few seconds, and that's when I saw a silhouette of legs standing perfectly still on the other side of the camper in their driveway. I absolutely pooped my pants and sprinted through the shortcut into my friend's back door. I don't know what this guy's intentions are, but they definitely don't seem good. And even now, whenever we walk through there, he's always outside watching. And since then, one very strange thing has happened. I don't know if it was the same guy die, but it very well could have been. One night, we were walking my friend home in my neighborhood and decided to take the long way back to my house. To avoid that creepy guy again, we dropped him off and all was well until we started walking back. It was me and 3 other friends. We were almost at the end of the road near the stop sign when a white truck flew up to us, rolled down the window, and started barking questions at us. I tried to remain calm and ask him if there was some problem. He said that someone in a blue hoodie had walked onto his back porch and was banging on the glass door. One of my friends was wearing a white hoodie, by the way, But still, this guy started accusing him of doing it, even though we hadn't gone on anyone's porch at all. He demanded our names, so I just gave him my first name and nothing else. The entire time he had his hand on his hip, looking like he was about to burst a blood vessel in his head. He was so angry, we told him that we were in the complete opposite side of the neighborhood when it happened. But he didn't buy it, and he got angry and just screamed at us. "Don't you boys know it's dangerous to be out here at this time?" And I just said, "Now I do." And he pretended to drive off. But as we started walking back, he began following us in his car. For the entire 20-minute walk back, this creepy weirdo trailed us about 100 feet behind in his truck, matching our pace. And he followed us down 3 turns, all the way to my house. And the moment he saw us go inside, he speeds off. I didn't wake my parents, which was stupid, and in hindsight, I definitely should have. So they could have gone outside and asked this weirdo what in God's name he was doing, harassing us alone at 2 a.m. and stalking us back to my house. I don't know if it was the same guy, since he claimed his house was in a different side of the neighborhood, but he could have been lying. Anyone unhinged enough to follow some kid's home like that can't be taken seriously. During my 7th grade year of middle school, there was a girl in my class who suddenly took a liking to me. We'll call her Stacy. It was obvious that she liked me, but I didn't care too much about it, especially since at the time it didn't really bother me. A couple of weeks passed since she had made it readily apparent that she had a crush on me. I was at home in my basement when I got a text on my phone. It was from a random number that I had never seen before. And even weirder, I had never given out my iCloud account to anyone from school, and the email itself was random enough that no one could have guessed what it was. I didn't have a phone number at the time anyways. A couple of minutes later, I eventually found out that it was Stacy texting me. I entertained the conversation because I didn't want to be mean and just ignore her. And she started texting me every day, like clockwork. At the time, I had a crush on this girl, Amanda, and the Halloween dance was coming up. And about a week before the dance, I got a text from Stacy in this text thread. She finally confessed her feelings for me. I told her that I didn't return those feelings and that I was sorry, trying to be as respectful as possible. Stacy then texted me back, saying she knew that it was a long shot that I'd like her back because she already knew who I liked. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, what? How does she know that? So I asked, how do you know who I like? And she told me Amanda and said that her friend had told her, the friend she mentioned, just having to be dating my friend, the same friend that I had confided in about my crush. I asked, did my friend tell you about who I liked? And she replied, yes. And I was pretty angry. The next day, I confronted my friend, and he swore that he hadn't told anyone. I trusted him, and later that night, I confronted Stacy, and she admitted that she had lied. She figured out who I liked just by staring at me so much. I didn't even know what to say, other than yelling at her to stop talking to me. Fast forward to that summer, and she was still texting me every day, telling me how she needed to get over me. And I mean every day, for about 2 weeks. I kept telling her that she would find someone else who liked her and cared for her, and that I just wasn't the one. And eventually, I got tired of it and told her that if she was really going to get over me, she needed to stop talking to me. And she got angry, and I told her to stop contacting me. And I thought that that was it. But I was so wrong, as the worst was yet to come. Fast forward to my birthday. In the 8th grade, I thought everything had blown over By then, half a year had passed, and I had put it all behind me. That morning, I got to school and saw that Stacy had taped a drawing to my locker, wishing me a happy birthday. I took the drawing off, shoved it into my locker, and completely forgot about it for the rest of the day. That night, when my friends were over, Stacy texted me and asked why I didn't say thank you for the drawing. I apologized, saying that I had a lot going on that day, and she accepted it and thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to multiple texts from her telling me how I was wrong for not saying thank you. And at that point, I had finally had enough and just blocked her. Near the end of the school year, we were assigned an essay about a lesson that we had learned in life. It was a pretty easy assignment until I realized that we had to present it in front of the class. My school was small, with only about 40 kids per grade, and each grade was split into 2 sections, so it wasn't the worst thing to present in front of everyone until it was the day arrived when we had to present I believe, essays. When Stacy waddled up to the front of the class and announced that her essay title, Love is a Delicate Matter, and I thought to myself, God, what if this is about me? And it was the entire essay. Top to bottom was about her confessing her love for me. And at the end, she completely slandered me, calling me a jerk that was never worth liking. To begin with, the worst part, the way word traveled in our school. There were no secrets. Everyone had already known that she had liked me since 7th grade. And it was one of the most embarrassing moments I have ever had to sit through. Not to mention, she got a standing ovation. People were crying, and my friends were laughing their butts off. Even the teachers were laughing. I only had one thought for the rest of the day. What just happened? And I thought that this was finally the end of it, but I was wrong again. A couple of years passed, and nothing crazy has happened since until my junior year. A good buddy of mine told me that he needed to talk to me about something important, and we met up in the stairwell, and he told me that Stacy had made a play about us in middle school. Yeah, a full-on play to present in front of an actual crowd. And I was baffled. The girl made her whole upbringing about a middle school crush. And it turns out they recorded the play, and I finally got to watch it this year. It was terrible. And I mean, I wanted to pull my eyes out. Kind of bad. And I also saved her essay. That's pretty bad too, anyways. I just graduated, and I hope I never see this dumb again. My husband keeps texting me. He's been dead for 5 years. Drew and I had been married for just over 2 years when the accident happened. A head-on collision, a drunk driver. He died instantly, declared dead at the scene. That was in 2020. It was cruel timing. The world was already shutting down, cities crumbling into silence. And there I was, trying to grieve a life-shattering loss in total isolation. The pandemic became my cocoon, my prison and my shield. My days blurred into a gray haze of mourning, talking to photos, whispering to memories. But time, even when it limps, moves forward. With the help of my parents, Drew's mother, who had always been overbearing but grieving in her own raw way, and a few friends who checked in on me over Zoom, I learned how to breathe again. I even started dating, cautiously, about a year later. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like surviving. That's when the texts started. I was out on a date, an upscale Italian restaurant with live violin music and overpriced wine. When I saw it, a message from Drew's number, blank, just a message containing nothing but a single space. I froze. I stared at the screen, heart thudding, fingers trembling. My date was talking about his dog, or maybe his brother's wedding. I wasn't hearing any of it. The next message came 3 days later. This time, it was a single punctuation mark, a period. A prank? A sick joke? I wanted to believe that. Or maybe someone had gotten his old number. A glitch in the system, perhaps. But it didn't stop. They kept coming. Sometimes every few days. Sometimes during moments that felt strangely timed. Like when I was getting dressed for a date, or when I passed by the photo of Drew and me on our honeymoon. The messages were just strings of punctuation, quotation mark, comma, period. Random, meaningless, but always unsettling. I asked the phone company to deactivate the number. They said it wasn't active. That was impossible. The frequency increased as the anniversary of his death approached. 1 text a day became 2, then 5. On the actual day, October 3rd, they flooded in. Dozens. I stopped counting at 37. That's when I realized this was more than a prank. I went to the police. Could be a scammer, the officer said, in a tone that bordered on disinterest. People are desperate these days, but they're not asking for money. Just nonsense. Punctuation. On the anniversary of his death, we'll file a report. If anything else happens, let us know. I went home. As I did every year, I opened a bottle of Drew's favorite wine, Merlot, and put on his favorite movie, Stranger Than Fiction. It was a private tradition I kept alive, a way to honor him. I sat on the couch and patted the empty space beside me, imagining him sitting there, laughing at Will Ferrell's awkward charm. I miss you, I said to the silence. Ping. I looked at my phone. Ah, I stared. Something about it chilled me deeper than usual. I called the police again. They're still coming, I said. They're getting more frequent. We're in touch with the phone company. We'll call you back in 20 minutes, the dispatcher promised. 8:56 p.m. I tried to distract myself, but the pings kept coming, like someone was hammering punctuation into my psyche. My wine glass slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered. I cursed, knelt to clean it, and sliced my thumb. Red ran down my palm. Ping. I froze. Wiping my bleeding hand on a paper towel, I walked over to the phone. A smiley face. A fucking smiley face. Not just any smiley, Drew's smiley. He always put a space between the colon and the parenthesis. Said it looked more human that way. No one else texted like that. I dropped the phone. Someone was watching me cut myself, watching me react. I slammed the curtains shut, locked every door. My skin itched with the feeling of unseen eyes. I checked every closet, every room. Nothing. Ping, 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 ping. The phone lit up with a storm of nonsense. Then, run. I blinked. Ping, run. Again. It repeated, between the nonsense. I didn't want to believe it. I grabbed my keys. Just as I reached the door, the phone rang. The police. Get out of the house, the voice said. What? The texts. They're coming from inside your house. My body turned to ice. I never heard the footsteps behind me, only felt the arms as they yanked me back hard. I screamed, fought, fell. She stood over me. Drew's mother. Whore, she hissed. You moved on. So quickly. After everything. It's been 5 years, I gasped. You never loved him. You forgot him the moment he was in the ground. She kicked me hard. The wind shot from my lungs. I watched you. On your dates. Laughing. Happy. While I sat at home surrounded by his things. You left him behind. I didn't. I croaked. She raised her hand. Then the door crashed open. A police officer tackled her. The nightmare ended, or so I thought. She was arrested. She confessed to sending the texts using Drew's old number. She'd stolen a SIM card. She followed me, took photos, sent messages at carefully timed moments. She had access to the house. Drew had given her a key before he died. All this just to haunt me into never loving again. There were security tapes, receipts, a twisted diary where she wrote, "She will remember him forever." But one thing didn't fit. According to the police, she had never sent the run messages. Not once. Those weren't from her. Sometimes I still think about that night, about the texts. I think about the way the run messages came right before she attacked, how they were unlike any others, how they felt urgent, alive. What if? Number, I tell myself not to go there. And yet, every October 3rd, when I sit down with a glass of Merlot and Stranger Than Fiction, my phone vibrates. Always once, always at 9:11 p.m., always the same message. And I whisper to the dark, "I miss you too. I miss you." Was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic hit. And now, one of my favorite stories to tell. Now that I'm no longer scared, I've moved 1,000 miles away. In a few years' time has passed, so my husband was in the military during this time, and I was a housewife due to work being hard for me to get in my area that I was in, as I can't drive, and lived off base. Well, any military person knows that a military schedule is pretty darn predictable, and much of our lives ran on an easy-to-memorize routine. And to make matters worse, my husband was often gone for long hours for about 2 to 3 months. I had been seeing this guy wandering around my home, peeking in windows. Honestly, I didn't originally think much of it. Beyond being weirded out, we didn't have anything that would interest a robber. No TV, a single 7-year-old computer, a broken couch and table, and a mattress on the floor. Literally nothing expensive in our home, beyond a gun that was locked up in a safe that might have looked like it had valuables. But that's a lot of work for what looked like a home of people living in Pody. So I didn't think anything of it yet. He kept coming back when my husband was gone. I'd seen him every few days, or hear him due to my normally super sweet cat at the time, hating him, hissing and yelling when he saw him, so I'd know that he was there. When I'd hear my cat making an angry fuss. One day I went out with my husband, and I guess I didn't lock the door properly or something, as our lock could be a bit finicky, and I was running late. According to our normal schedule, I would have gone to base with my husband for a family mandatory fun event and came back home alone and an Uber while my husband stayed at the base to work or hang out with his friends. And what ended up happening was that I fell sick with a migraine. I have hemiplegic migraine, so it can actually be pretty serious. And his sergeant told him to take me home and take care of me when he saw me. Not before I go on, I should probably describe my old home. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, complex in the mountains. It was a massive complex. My home layout was this. My front door led to my kitchen and dining area, and the wall next to my door had another glass door, I think a patio, and across from my kitchen was my room. Then you go down the hall and hit the living room, which had another glass door wall next to the fireplace. And finally after that, you go across the living room at the end of the hall and reach our guest room, or my plant room, cat's playroom, SLG guest room, which had yet another glass door. I was literally surrounded by giant glass doors. And outside we had a porch, and on the porch was a storage closet where I usually kept my bike since I couldn't drive. due to my migraines and seizures now. Back to the story, now that I've set the scene. When my husband brought me home again, not per our normal schedule, we arrived to find our door slightly ajar. We gave each other a look and went inside anyway, with me mumbling that I must not have locked it properly due to being in a rush that morning. We walked into the kitchen, where my husband immediately went to the fridge, looking around for water for himself and me. He then spoke for the first time in the fridge. Honestly, I don't even remember what he said, but a few seconds after he spoke, we heard something our porch glass door at the back of our home moved, and we both knew that sound really well, since I like to sit in the porch, reading for hours, so I was always coming in and out. He grabbed my shoulder and whispered for me to grab his gun from our room. He then grabbed a knife and went toward the living room. I went and grabbed the gun, noticing on my way into our room that our living room glass porch door was wide open, and upon giving my husband the gun and following behind him, I dialed 911 in my panic, saying I had an active break-in while my husband did a sweep of our home. I walked back down the hall toward the kitchen to see if the intruder had gone around the back to the front. The only way out of the area he went. We lived on a literal mountainside, and one side was blocked off out back, was blocked